Pat Becher from the Mohawk Valley Water Authority, the executive director. Let me turn your mic on. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You were taking some shots at the Mets during the break.
Sorry about that.
Let you continue.
Well, the Yankees lost yesterday, too. So
Well, hey,
they're only 2.5 games back. Right?
Yeah, they're hanging in there.
I'm not against the Yankees. They got a nice young team. They didn't go buy the team. I can root for the Yankees, even as a Mets fan.
Oh, thank you.
Let's talk about this water report.
Please.
What do you make of it? Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi, of course, saying there's this independent report found four carcinogens in the local water supply. One of them, the most dangerous, I guess, being chloroform.
Well, let me just first explain that it's disappointing that the Assemblyman didn't come and talk to us first, face-to-face. We could have answered all these questions right off the bat. We sent some information. I understand that he feels it was critical of the report itself, and that's exactly what it was intended to be, very critical of this report. First of all, they did not do a study. They didn't come and test our water. What they did was compile a national database based on data reported by us. Every year we compile what's called an annual water quality report under very strict guidelines set by the state of New York Health Department and the federal EPA under the Safe Water Drinking Act. So those numbers are developed by us, reported by us, excuse me, and actually delivered to every end user in the system under law that's required. The tests are done by outside laboratories that are certified by the state of New York. So the call for independent testing, we presume, is going to show the same results that we've already reported. We're not trying to hide anything. This information is readily available. All this working group did, the environmental working group, is take that data and compile it.
Yeah.
But then, instead of comparing it to the established guidelines by both our state health department and the federal EPA, they instead compared it to some strict goals that are set by a group in California that acts as an advisory board for the state of California. And most of those goals aren't even requirements in the state of California itself because they're either unattainable, they're unmeasurable, or they're unreasonable because it would be exorbitant in cost for a very marginal improvement. To use the term high and say that our levels are high is a misnomer. They're half of what the EPA says is an allowable limit, above which there may be some increased risk from long-term exposure. So the preponderance of science in this country, which is what the EPA and the state health departments use, says that above certain levels, there's an increased risk. We're half of that level. So we're not high by their standards at all. And if you talk to the state health department, I'm sure they would tell you that our water is deemed to be very safe. Okay, but in California, what this group is saying is that if a level causes more than a 1 in a million chance that somebody might have an adverse health effect over 70 years, that's what they use, 70 years of daily exposure. If the risk goes above 1 in a million people having an adverse effect, they consider that to be dangerous, so they're calling our water to be dangerous. We're fully aware of that. Now, yes, our numbers are a little bit higher than some others for this particular compound, but what we have to remember is there's over 200 what they call contaminants that could possibly be in the water that are monitored under federal laws. Okay, this is one. So if you compare our water to somebody else, yes, exactly. Okay. So if you compare our water to somebody else, yeah, we might have a little bit higher number on this. They might have a little higher number on something else, but it's still a relatively low number, and it's half of what the EPA says is the maximum amount before there begins to be some increased risk. So our levels are low. They're not as low as some others, but that's because of the raw water. We have a reservoir that's totally man-made. It's fed completely by streams and creeks that cover almost 400 square miles of watershed. So the effect of that is that all the water in Hinckley Reservoir is essentially runoff. It's surface water runoff, which carries vegetation, plant life into the reservoir. And it's the molecules in that plant life that can interact with chlorine and form these kinds of what we call disinfection byproducts, compounds as a byproduct of disinfecting the water itself. So the way that we tackle that is we try to remove as much of that plant life, the organic matter in the water, before we disinfect it. We've spent $35 million over the last 8 years to achieve that. We've brought those numbers way down. We've all changed our treatment process to use carbon in our filter beds instead of sand, which gets out more of those organic molecules right up front. So we've brought those numbers way down. Achieving greater than that would be extremely difficult for us. But again, the levels we're talking about are not deemed to be high by any stretch of the imagination. By
not state or federal.
But either the state or the federal government. To call it poison, frankly, is just irresponsible. Our water is not poisonous. I mean, it's a horrible term. I'm sorry that he said that. excuse me. The other thing to remember, and the reason why that we criticize this report, is because the Environmental Working Group, if you go to their website, they are actually selling a number of different kinds of products across a whole array of, whether it's sunscreens, whether it's diapers, or water filtration systems, under-the-counter water filtration systems. What they do is they rate these products for different companies. They get paid to do those ratings, and then they get paid to advertise those on their website. So, I'm always skeptical of an organization that runs around ringing alarm bells, excuse me, with unrealistic standards, and then they're offering the solution to those problems that they're talking about while making money off of it. And that's exactly what's happening.
Unfortunately, the Assemblyman is, we talked to him last segment, and then I thanked him, and we moved on. We wanted your response. I wish he was on to react to that. I do think you bring up a lot of fair points. Back to the point that he says our water is the most poisoned in New York State. You totally dispute that, and you think it's irresponsible to use the word poison.
Yes, I think it's highly irresponsible. The water is not poisonous. The water is very safe, and anybody at the State Health Department can tell you that. But the nature of our water is different than other systems. Now, he's talking about a state average. The Environmental Working Group is talking about a state average. One of the things you have to remember is that within that state average are a lot of large water systems, particularly on Long Island, Suffolk County, Nassau County, where they're using groundwater. So they don't have that influx of all that vegetation that's washing in. So their water is very different. If you took an average of simply surface water systems across the state, we wouldn't be that far out of line at all. But it's skewed. And again, we're talking about one contaminant out of a list of 200 that are monitored. So, yes, we might have a higher number on one item. Somebody else, I'm sure, has a higher number on another item.
I want to go back to some numbers you mentioned. I haven't seen the report. I should take a look at it. You're saying that their report says if the odds of having an adverse reaction, getting sick or something, is higher than 1 in a million over the course of 70 years of exposure, that you basically get a failing grade, for lack of a better term.
Sort of. They apply that level mostly for carcinogens. So what they're saying is that with a particular carcinogen, such as chloroform, if long-term exposure over 70 years raises your risk of an adverse health effect above 1 in a million, they consider that to be dangerous. So their recommendation for that particular item is 1 part per billion. The EPA says above 80 parts per billion is when there may be an elevated risk moving forward in the future. And again, we're at half that level. So they're applying a very, very different standard. It's a standard that's developed in sort of a, pie in the sky, wishful, perfect world. If everything was great, this is what we would do. The fact of the matter is that water systems across the country are dealing with enormous challenges of all kinds. The good news for us is that our water system derives in the Adirondack Park, which is a protected area.
This is what I was trying to mention to him as well. This is all an area where there's limited the number of like pesticides and things that can be used. Explain this.
Exactly. There's no commercial farming up there, so we don't have to worry about pesticides or commercial fertilizers, industrial waste discharges from manufacturing. You go down the road to Schenectady, for example, they're trying to deal with certain kinds of byproducts from plastic manufacturing, things of those natures. So,
in the water supply.
In the water supplies. So, you can sort of, pick which contaminant you're looking for, and different water systems are going to have their own unique problems with elevated chemicals that might be deriving from some factory or some leaking from an underground tank of petroleum that gets in, even in the groundwater. So even groundwater systems are dealing with their own unique challenges that we don't face at all here. So you have to look at the whole array of things that can get in the water before you're going to conclude that our water is more dangerous than somebody else's water.
Do you anticipate with the addition or the bringing on of Suez North America that these levels will decrease even more?
Well, Suez North America is an international firm. They have 85,000 employees worldwide. They have almost 4,000 here in the United States. They're operating about a dozen utilities already in New York State and 100 or so across the country. They have expertise. They're a full engineering firm. They do plan to do additional research, more to try to streamline the operation and try to find further efficiencies. If they can determine that there's ways to tweak the system a little bit and make modest improvements, I'm sure they're going to recommend those to us. I know they'll be looking at it. But, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 10 years hiring renowned experts from across the country that have expertise in this field. And we did extensive testing for years to determine the optimal method to disinfect this water and treat it and filter it. And that's why we switched to the carbon that's in our filter beds. And we took the Deerfield Reservoir, the Marcy Reservoir, and the Southern Reservoir offline and replaced them with tanks because they could be affected by weather and that same runoff from the rain that's carrying vegetation. And now we don't have to rechlorinate the water as we're pulling it out of those reservoirs. So that makes a huge difference, too.
Let me ask you this. Is the water cleaner before it's filtered?
No.
I totally understand what you're saying, but the idea that there's chloroform in the water, no matter how much it could be, just kind of raises an alarm bell. But it's a byproduct of the filtration. Is there a safer way to do it?
Well, it's a byproduct of the disinfection.
The disinfection,
right.
Excuse me, yes.
So chlorine is our disinfecting agent. With our research, we also looked at other methods of disinfecting the water. We looked at ozone, for example. We looked at chloramines instead of chlorine. They all had their significant trouble spots as well. And some are harder to manage throughout the distribution system and maintain the proper level to make sure the water stays disinfected as it's moving across the piping system. So we determined that the chlorine was still the most stable and safest way to disinfect it. So then the strategy shifted to how do we remove more of the organic matter, that vegetation that washes into Hinckley Reservoir right up front so that it doesn't interact with that chlorine as much.
Okay.
That chemical process is also, it's dependent on time for exposure, and it's also dependent on temperature. So, for example, compare us to Syracuse. They're using Skinny Atlas Lake. If you've ever swam in Skinny Atlas Lake, you'll know even in August it's freezing cold. So, you know, the temperature factor as a catalyst doesn't drive their process as high as it does ours, for example, because Hinckley has greater surface area, it's not as deep, it warms up more. They also have a water source that's fed by underground springs. They rely a lot less on runoff, and they're not dealing with a 400 square mile area of vegetation washing into it. So the characteristics of their water are very different than ours, and so naturally they're going to have different numbers than we do. What we're doing is trying to optimize the science of our unique water chemistry that we get out of that Adirondack watershed. It's very difficult to compare it to another system. And again, you know, if you look hard enough, I'm sure you'll find numbers over there that are higher than numbers over here.
In certain categories.
And you can do the same alarm ringing.
So the company that put out this survey or compiled the data, which you provided to them, basically,
right. Yeah.
They sell these little kits online, right? For the purification, you mentioned they sell these kits.
Water filters.
How are they filtering it to get chloroform out?
You know, I don't know. I mean, there are a number of home filtration systems on the market. They're all supposed to do different things and for different purposes. And I'm sure that some of them are very effective at what they're claiming to do. I don't know of one that's specifically designed to remove this category of carcinogens known as trihalomethanes. And if anyone's lived in this area long enough, they probably remember that term from 25 years ago, before we even had a filter plant. There was a big problem with those compounds. Now the filter plant, removed a lot of it. Now the carbon we've added to the plant removes even more of it. So at this point, it's not a problem. But those under the sink filtration systems are good for certain things, and I'm not knocking them. But what I am saying is that this environmental working group derives revenue from the sale of those things and their relationship with the companies that are manufacturing them and having them advertised on their website. So, as I say, I'm always suspicious of somebody that is scaring people into buying things and then making money off that solution.
Yeah. All right. Finally, would you recommend a filtration system if somebody, for instance, I just drink the tap water most of the time. Would you recommend that? Should I do that, or you think I'm good?
I drink tap water, and I feel perfectly comfortable doing that. I would hope that you would too.
Okay.
One of the problems too is a lot of people buy these under the counter filters.
Yeah.
If you don't maintain them properly, then you could
change the filter.
Change the filters. Now you're growing bacteria under your sink, and you're making your water worse than it is as it comes into your house.
A water supply that's on a spring, like you referenced other parts of the state, that's not possible for us.
No. 100 years ago, this system was drawing from a number of wells and a local reservoir up on Grafenberg Road. And it was just not enough quantity, and the water, the groundwater around here wasn't really all that great. So in their wisdom, way back in 1905, they went to the West Canada Creek, which was a more reliable source, and it was better water coming out of the Adirondacks.
All right. Pat, thank you for your time.
My
just
pleasure.
to recap again, it was kind of alarming to hear those numbers, and I was kind of surprised at your response as well. You feel it's irresponsible to make the claims that this group and the Assemblyman are making.
I think that the language being used has specific meaning to people within our industry, and it's not something that should be thrown around very casually like that.
Okay.